Hello and welcome to the Stormont Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics of Stormont and inside policy making for Northern Ireland. I'm David McCann, and also on the podcast is Tim Cairns, former Special Advisor to First Minister Peter Robinson. Hello, Tim.
Hello, David. I hope you're charged up with your Diet Coke today. That's been the most commented topic on Twitter.
That's amazing. That's really good. Thank you for looking into my dietary habits. And we also have our other regular, Michael McKernan. He was a former Special Advisor to the SDLP. Hello, Michael.
Hello, David, and hello, Tim.
Hello, Michael.
We are discussing the recent debates about the monitoring round. Ministers got some extra cash to meet pay disputes within their own departments. We will be asking whether it's enough and what is it like to be a smaller party in these talks. Then, sparks have been flying on Twitter between the Deputy First Minister and the Leader of the Opposition over presidential voting rights being extended to Northern Ireland. In the week the voters in the Republic choose a new head of state, we will be discussing who is right and whether what we are seeing is just a taste of what is coming down the road ahead of the next Assembly election. Okay, and on to our first topic today. Ministers came thick and fast toward the Department of Finance to get extra money to help settle pay disputes within their portfolios. So the Department for Justice looking for extra money for the police service. We had the Department of Education looking for some more money to help with teachers' pay. And the Department of Health looking for extra money for nurses in order to avoid a strike, a threat of strike that is potentially being touted to take place if they don't get what they are looking for. Mike Nesbitt, the Health Minister, did get some help. The Executive kicked him an extra £100 million. That gets him 50% of the way to help settling the pay dispute, even though there was a bit of confusion with the First Minister saying that this was pretty much resolved and Mike Nesbitt saying, no, it isn't. Still have to find the other £100 million. I'm going to kick off first with you, Tim. It's interesting having a government back to actually resolve these things before people were left kind of hand dry, and we did see plenty of strike action. So first of all, the £100 million kicked toward Mike Nesbitt. He still now has to find another £100 million. What did you make of the confusion with Michelle O'Neill almost saying job done? The Deputy First Minister saying she is confident that this will be resolved, and Mike Nesbitt turning around saying, actually, no, I still have to find £100 million somewhere, so I'm not out of the woods yet.
Well, I think we see the problem laid bare with the government that we have. If you have a mandatory coalition like this, monitoring rounds become bizarre because all of these conversations would take place behind closed doors because it's politically negative to go out and have these conversations in public. And in actual fact, if you were a health minister that was going out and saying, well, the Prime Minister hasn't given me any money or enough money to sort this out, well, you wouldn't be a health minister for very much longer. So what we actually see is a little glimpse into the cabinet room at Downing Street played out on the steps of Stormont Castle as the as the executive ends and the ministers go out. What would be private in any other jurisdiction in the Western world is just laid bare for everybody to see because these people can't be sacked, right? Because Mike Nesbitt, he's not in the pay of Michelle O'Neill or Emma Little-Pengelly. He can say whatever he wants, and there's no consequences to him for that. So a health minister might leave the cabinet table seething at the paltry sum that they've got, but Mike Nesbitt can tell us that he's seething. Now, look, I think there's two sides to this. Mike Nesbitt needs a figure to settle the pay dispute. That's one thing. And on the other side of it, the Deputy First Minister said, well, we've helped you to resolve this pay dispute. You need to make up the shortfall yourself from whatever money there is in your budget. Look, Mike Nesbitt gets, 51%, 52% of the entire block grant that Northern Ireland receives. So I think on one hand, you could say it's absolutely and utterly absurd that Mike Nesbitt cannot find an extra 100 million to settle this pay dispute. And from Mike Nesbitt's point of view, you would say, well, look, in other jurisdictions, there wouldn't be a fight at the table. We would either decide collectively to resolve this pay dispute or we wouldn't. I wouldn't be left high and dry to go and face the unions without enough money. We'd have collectively sorted this out behind the scenes and then go and put the pay dispute collectively to the trade unions. So I think on both sides, there's a little bit of truth on both sides. But I do think it ill behoves, really, the health minister who gets so much of the block grant to say that he's not able to make choices within his department that would free up money. And I think that comes down to the fundamental problem that we have. Ministers don't want to make choices that would be difficult for them. And in mandatory coalition, there's no incentive to do that.
Yeah, and Paul Given and Naomi Long didn't get great settlements either. Paul Given, I know, got I think about an extra £37 million to help settle the case. Dana Long got even less than that, but yet it seems like they're just going to get on with it.
And we know today, we know from Jane McCormick's story this week that the health minister was told, or the finance minister was told a month ago, the Treasury weren't going to bail this out, weren't going to bail out the police, and Naomi Long just has to get on with it. So we do see slightly different reactions. Like, I think when it's an executive party, it'll be interesting to hear what Michael has to say about this as someone who was in one of the smaller parties around the executive table. But if you're an executive partner, it's much more difficult for Paul Given to come out and say, well, the First and Deputy First Minister shafted me. I mean, their party colleagues, or certainly the Deputy First Minister is a party colleague. So it's a little bit more difficult in that scenario. But I think also, conversely, there have been times over the last 27, 28 years, however we've had devolution 4, where the smaller parties have been completely knifed because they have no skin in the game. When this is set in the dark rooms of Stormont Castle, when the allocations are divvied up between the two bigger parties, the smaller parties at the table just have to take what they're given or just lump it. That's really it.
Okay, Michael, I was deliberately leaving you for last to come to on this because, as Tim was saying, for 9 years, for reasons which
Michael's had to lump it, so he has.
for reasons we'll maybe get into with a therapist at some point, but I'll be your therapist on this. You did this for 9 years, and the SDLP and the Ulster Unionists regularly, as Tim was saying, did get the fuzzy end of the lollipop on funding decisions. So do you think that's what happened? That's what's happened with Mike Nesbitt here?
Well, that's what's always happened. I think you have to start with what these things are. The only bit of in-year adjustment to the budget is these monitoring rounds where unspent monies get reallocated. And there's a lot of trickery in that, but the proposals are put to the Department of Finance, and the Finance Minister's pretty much always been a DUP or Sinn Féin minister. And they come forward with proposals. But of course, those proposals have to be acceptable to the First and Deputy First Ministers who control the executive. The smaller parties can make their pitches, they can make brilliant arguments, they can tug at your heartstrings, they can use whatever device they like to get some share of that money. But they're always going to be carved out of it to some extent because their political opponents are saying, oh, why should we help them? Let them stew in their own juices. But on that point in relation to Mike, that health pay increase was a known cost. It was a commitment that the health minister made, that there'd be parity with the rest of the UK. And I think it's Nuala McConville, we call her Nuala McAllister.
Nuala McAllister is the Alliance representative on the Health Committee.
Yeah, but she made the point that Mike should have planned for that. When he got his budget, his 9 billion or whatever it is, and in my time, health was in the 40% of the total executive budget. It's now in the 50% of and it could go on forever without transformation, which is what he should really be getting on with. But Mike should have provided for that because he knew it was going to come, and he should have found a way from the 9 billion that he got to provide for that. That's why I presume the executive office simply wasn't going to solve his problem for him. So they've half solved it. They've given half the money. 100 million is not easy to find, despite the enormity of the health budget. It's not easy to find. The other thing I should say is there's the devil's in the detail when it comes to these monitoring rounds, and it depends on departmental budgets and how they're structured. So, for example, if you take the Department of Education, this used to really frustrate Sammy Wilson as Finance Minister, John O'Dowd as Education Minister. If O'Dowd didn't spend in a certain area, it was still all under the heading schools. So he could reallocate thousands or tens, hundreds of millions from within his own budget without interference. He could do his own monitoring round, if you like, for areas where he'd got surplus. But other departments couldn't do that. For example, the housing budget, and I have the war wounds from this, the housing budget would be divided into categories like, new build, maintenance, plant maintenance, response maintenance, co-ownership, grants, all those things. And if you had a surplus in one area, you couldn't put it in the other area. It had to be surrendered to the monitoring round, and the Department of Finance could propose taking it off you. And that, of course, happened to us. We had built up a surplus because the priority was housing new build, and we built up a surplus there by saving money on maintenance. And then when we went to apply that maintenance money to the new build budget, we were told, no, we're taking that. Thank you very much. It was a smash and grab raid on the housing budget. So yes, I have the wounds from the monitoring round.
Michael, why then? This has always begged the question, because I remember saying to people in the SDLP during the time you were there, why are you in government? You know, why are you in? What is it about the smaller parties that makes them go into government? Whenever we sing "Time Without Number," the amount of times that people in nefarious characters like Tim would deny you proper funding to do your job.
Nothing to do with me. Nothing.
Whatever.
But the answer to that is, firstly, politicians like having power, and you have some power. It's just that where you clash with the bigger parties, you're going to lose. But you still have power. I mean, we still built more houses than had been built. We doubled the amount of new housing output against the direct rule numbers. So you can do things. You can do good things. I'm sure Naomi Long is doing good things in justice. I'm sure Mike is doing other good things that we don't hear about in health. So there are reasons for staying. But yes, it does reach the point, if you're regularly shafted and humiliated, which you are from time to time, you can question your membership.
But there was particular humiliation, I think, Michael, for you back in the day, and Alex Atwood, and I think Danny Kennedy was the UUP minister. Like, it did strike me at the time that was a pretty savage cuts that were put on each of those ministers' heads. And at that point in time, why was there a conversation with Alex Atwood and the party about walking away, or was that never even contemplated?
No, there was a conversation. In fact, it was a continuing conversation. Is there any point in being here if they won't let you do what you're there to do? So yeah, there were some savage cuts, all right, but particularly reprehensible in the area of housing, and even in the area of urban regeneration. There was a lot of money in the pot for, still hasn't happened, the Royal Exchange, as it's called, which was to be the next big thing after Victoria Square. There was a lot of money in the pot for that, and that was grabbed in a monetary round. But your urban regeneration
how
budget.
Serious were those conversations? Was it just like, if this goes on, we're going to have to go? Or was it very serious? Sit down.
Yeah.
Should we leave?
Yeah, well, it depends. When Mark Durkan was leader, he did not want to leave. He wanted to work the institutions as best as they could be worked. So he would not have taken Margaret Ritchie or Alex Atwood out of the executive. But after that, certainly there was a growing mood. We shouldn't be part of this charade. But you still did get good things done. I mean, Margaret Ritchie and Alex Atwood and Mark H. Durkan, I mean, they really applied themselves, even though their power was limited. They did get some good things done. And
the SDLP and UUP's vote share went one way during that time as well. The voters did not. I mean, interestingly, I remember talking to an old Alliance hand. I remember in 2015 when Sinn Féin and the DUP hauled in Stephen Farry and overturned his decision to close down St Mary's. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, St Mary's is the Catholic Teacher Training College, and for our international listeners, yes, we do. And
it wasn't just St Mary's; it was Stranmore, St Mary's, and merged them both into Queen's.
Made them both into Queen's, and I remember Stephen Farry was the minister responsible, Department for Employment and Learning, and he was brought in, and that was overturned. And I remember making an argument at the time: Alliance should walk over this. Integrated education is a core value to your party.
There's an even worse one today.
And just a second. And I remember saying to them, you should walk over this. And Joe, having a pint with them last year, and they said to me, I remember you saying that. Said, you're right. We were wrong to stay. We should have walked from the executive over that.
But look at Andrew Muir now. Andrew Muir wants to do something to try and clean up the pollution in Lough Neagh.
He does,
but
the environment doesn't cut through for an Alliance voter in the same way.
But he's Minister for the Environment. He wants to clean up the biggest inland waterway in the British Isles, the jewel in the crown of Northern Ireland, and he's not being let.
I can say I was involved in the Stranmore St Mary's merger into Queen's debate, but I wasn't really involved in the shafting of Danny Kennedy and Alex Atwood. So, but the interesting thing about the St Mary's and Stranmore one, I mean, like, That was like Sinn Féin and the DUP were rock solid on that. I mean, there was no movement on it. The second, St Mary's were on the phone to the Deputy First Minister, Stranmillis were straight on the phone and meeting with the First Minister at that time, being Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness. And, there was no chance. There was literally no chance that Stephen Farry's decision was going to stand. Now, personally, I remember at the time, and I don't want to, think anybody in Stranmillis think, that I would have let them down at the time. But I actually think Stephen Farry's decision was the right decision, both economically and what was going to be better for training teachers. Because you also have the absurd thing where the Open University was training teachers as well. And it seemed to be much more sensible that everything would be coalesce around the Stranmillis building and become part of Queen's. Yet there was just no way that decision was going to take place. Stephen Farry was never going to be allowed to do that. Now, he tried hard, and he nearly got away with it. But, those lobbies of St Mary's and Stranmillis were so strong within the DUP and Sinn Féin, it just wasn't going to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And
there's an overwhelming argument for single college.
Absolutely,
overwhelming. But they would never agree which side.
And it's bizarre. Well, they could never agree with it. And the decision that Stephen Farry made, close both colleges and Coleraine and the Open University as well, coalesce everything in Stranmillis, reduce numbers so you don't have so many teachers being trained who can't get jobs, was clearly, from a policy perspective, the right decision. But it just was never going to happen because politically, St Mary's was never going to go, which is what would have had to have happened. And, Stranmillis did not want to give up its independent college status. That was never going to happen. And, so those lobbies were so strong that it was just, there was no chance of it going ahead.
The Queens had their beady eyes on the wonderful grounds that Stranmillis owned.
And their beady eyes on St Mary's as well, to try and make some cash.
But the ground around Stranmillis is probably the most valuable real estate in Northern Ireland.
And they had so much Stockholm syndrome, the Alliance Party, that they would have been quite happy to stay in the executive. If it wasn't for Arlene Foster telling Naomi Long where to go on with reform proposals, Alliance probably would have stayed in the executive. Whereas at least the SDLP by 2016 and the Ulster Unionists had sense of now there's an official opposition. And we have to be fair to when Michael's time, opposition did not exist for that time, and the same for the Ulster Unionists as well. There was no opposition. You just sat outside the executive. There was no official opposition until 2016 to go to be fair to those parties. Last question on this then, and Tim, get your insights on this. In terms of the monitoring rounds and how that goes, did the DUP, because you were in one of the largest parties, because I remember when the Ulster Unionists left in 2015 over the Kevin McGuigan murder, and Michelle McIlveen replaced Danny Kennedy. And I remember Danny Kennedy just before that talked about he couldn't cut the grass verges and there was no money because he had no money for it. Michelle McIlveen comes in, and I think it was Arlene Foster was the finance minister, and all of a sudden, they find this money to cut the grass verges. And it was just seen as a sign of impotence for the Ulster Unionist Party. That must be, come on now, even you as being a DUP, there must have been some dirty tricks going on there.
But to be honest with you, I don't know specifically the answer to that because then ministers.
No, just that was an example.
But I think it does boil down to choices within departments at the time. So clearly Michelle McIlveen was coming in and making a choice. And clearly the in-out ministers ended, I think, almost exactly 10 years ago in and around when people will be listening to this podcast. And when obviously the DUP then took over other departments and were able to do more things within those departments. Obviously, clearly what you're going to do is do the things that the smaller party, in this case the Ulster Unionist Party, were saying that could not be done. Clearly, you're going to come in and be able to do the things that they were saying, just money wasn't going to be there. They were obviously going to be prioritised. Look, but it does really come back to this idea of choice. And this is what Treasury said in that letter to the finance minister just the start of this month. The Stormont has made choices. The health department has made choices. The Department of Justice has made choices. They've chosen not to make contingencies for pay rises. Well, that's your choice. You've made your choice not to do revenue raising. You've made a choice to do all of these things. So you just can't come to Treasury cap in hand and say, can you bail us out? That's simply not going to happen. Now, that did happen 20 years ago, 25 years ago when there was a peace process. But
the difference now is the Treasury doesn't have the money. The Treasury is skint.
And they're not, and they've got choices to make as well, because as you say, they're skint. I mean, we found out in the last couple of days, borrowing is more than what was being forecast in March, which means we're going to head for a brutal, I think, budget at the end of November, where we're all going to be paying more tax. Treasury's going to have to take that tax to pay down the debt. It's not going to be faffing around giving PSNI officers some money for what was a horrific breach of data. But that's just not going to sort this out. The Treasury's not going to sort it out. We're going to have to sort it ourselves. And I think we're going to have to move to a little bit of a more mature democracy where we say, look, these are our problems and we need to sort them out. And we need to, consider water charges. We need to consider how the rating system works so that more money is being brought in centrally from within Northern Ireland. And I don't know that we're mature enough to actually make those calls.
No, okay. Well, I'm going to make a choice now, lads, and it's to move on the podcast into our next topic. Lots more to come from Tim and Michael. When we come back, we will be talking about the recent Twitter spats between the Leader of the Opposition and the Deputy First Minister. Remember, if you'd like to watch the podcast, head over to YouTube and search Stormont Sources, press subscribe to the channel where you get our latest episodes, watch our clips and leave your comments on X and TikTok, and be the first to hear about upcoming events and special episodes. Just subscribe to our mailing list at stormontsources.com. This is the Stormont Sources podcast. Now, let's move on to our next topic. We're looking at a Twitter spot. We try not to indulge them too much here on the podcast, but this one did catch our eye. It was between the Leader of the Opposition, Matthew O'Toole, and the Deputy First Minister, Emma Little-Pengelly. They were having a dispute over the extension of presidential voting rights to citizens in Northern Ireland. Emma Pengelly was worried about some sovereignty issues, that if the Republic decided to do this, it could be a potential breach of the Good Friday Agreement. Matthew O'Toole was very quick to fire back on that, and the debate actually got a bit personal between the two of them. And we're just wondering, is this a sign of things to come ahead of the next Assembly election? Michael,
firstly, I think Twitter or X is not the platform to debate anything on. It doesn't lend itself to any kind of meaningful
Some
discussion.
of us have made a career out of that, Michael, so don't knock it.
But it does lend itself to firing out cheap insults at people or undermining of people.
Wait, so you read the exchange between me and David on this thread of Matthew and where we were throwing out cheap insults, and some wag on Twitter said, "Where's Michael when you need him?"
We
will come, by the way, for anyone listening in, we're just saving the best till last. So Michael, go ahead.
But anyhow, on the substance of it, there's a discussion to be had, unionist opposition to the extension of the franchise for the Irish presidency to Northern Ireland. I can't see why unionists would like it. I can see why some unionists like Tim would say, go ahead, fill your boots, nothing to do with me.
What did you make of Matthew's reference to Emma's unelected
I didn't like that because simply because I thought it was unnecessary. I don't think it's the most crushing personal insult anybody ever received, but I think it was a little slap that was unnecessary. And to Matthew's credit, I think a much better approach was the approach that he took with John Burrows when they were arguing about NATO and all the rest of it, G7 and everything, in the context of reunified Ireland. And I think Matthew said to John, "Let's have a debate about this," and they agreed to do it, and they've just done it on the radio. So that's the way. That's where to take these. Emma and Matthew should go and have that debate where they can stretch it out rather than insult each other in Twitter.
Okay, well now before me and Tim get into insults
I do, but I think it's quite funny. A couple of times we've traded insults on Twitter, and people have thought they've been serious, which is always amusing.
They're completely serious.
I want
to put it on record right now. I mean every word I say against Tim. On that you were talking nonsense, but we will get into that.
We'll get to that. I mean, you were talking nonsense.
We'll get to that. But it did get. But the thing that did strike the two of us was, and we did come to this conclusion separately, was the personal nature of it. And Emma, I think, did respond back to Matthew going, why are you getting so, why are you coming at me with that type of response?
Because he was co-opted, of course, too.
He was in 2020. So for anyone,
but he was subsequently elected.
He was in the position Emma's in, it's just the point that I'm making.
But I do think, and Joe, I always like the fact that we have a Scottish producer sitting in the corner of this, to explain to our international listeners. Little-Pengelly was co-opted in 2022 as an MLA. She replaced Jeffrey Donaldson a week after he got elected, and she is now the joint head of government, which is a first in Northern Ireland history that we've had an unelected first or deputy first minister in the post. But however, perfectly legitimate use of the system. And yes, Matthew O'Toole replaced Cara Hanna in 2020 as well, but he was elected in his own right in 2022. So Tim, we were saying there about the nature, and because we've seen a couple of these kind of Twitter. I mean, the debate today between John Burrows and Matthew O'Toole, that came off a Twitter spat between the two of them. Now, for full disclosure, fair play to William Crawley. He beat us by about 55 minutes to scoop that debate for Talkback. We did try and get it on here. I'm not going to, I'll for full disclosure.
Our day will come.
Our day will come. Don't worry. We'll get it. We're seeing more and more of these between people. We've seen David Honeyford and Robbie Butler. And I know we are getting closer to the election. So this is going to be what's going to happen, isn't it?
It is a remarkably long election campaign that is coming up, and there's no doubt about that. Politicians are at great pains to say, well, this is not the election campaign, this is not the lead into it. And look, it clearly is the election campaign, and it clearly is the lead into it. We've said this over the last couple of weeks. We've been talking about the SDLP and the Ulster Unionist Party conferences. The Alliance are feeling a little bit squeezed in the middle because the SDLP are coming at them, the Ulster Unionist Party are coming at them, and that's caused them to be a wee bit spiky. And we're clearly
not to mention a little attention from the DUP.
And the DUP has given a lot. Look, everybody's squeezing Alliance. Look, there's votes there that come. The Alliance Party, parties want to try and see if they can woo those votes back. That's perfectly legitimate in a political process. But Alliance have, understandably, I think, felt a little bit under attack and felt like they're the ones that everybody's squeezing in. As we said last week, that's what comes with being a party that's on the rise. People are going to start to squeeze your vote. But look, we are a year and a half away from an election. I think I would really love to sit the politicians down and say, guys, relax. See, you've got this time next year. This is when you need to be ramping up these Twitter spats and ramping up the politicking and the campaigning. You've got a bit of time yet, because I do think there are some important legislative measures that are going to come over, and I think we've started to see this kind of public spat polluting the Assembly a little bit. And with the Speaker this week, he's recognised that. He has stood up and said he's concerned about the rise of unparliamentary language. He is correct to say that, and I think he's correct to admonish. He admonished even some people in his own party for unparliamentary language, and I think we're seeing this spill into the chamber, and I don't think that is good for good legislative function either.
Well, I think that, let's hope they don't scale it back too much, Tim, because we've got about 76 episodes to fill before the next Assembly election. So we don't want to run out.
We can be as nasty to each other as we like. So we can generate that hate.
We are, and typically
somebody did say to me after a Twitter spat that I had with Chris Donnelly that there should be a celebrity boxing match. I think I'd rather take you on in the white collar boxing match. I think I've more chance of winning that.
Is that Amir Michael?
I think Michael would beat us both. But
who was it that said, to Jim Alistair, I'd clean your clock?
It was Evan Poots, the speaker. And he was the speaker when he said it as well.
He's obviously mellowed since he's been off to Barbados.
He's mellowed in the past 18 months. Yeah. But on the substantive issue itself, and even though we're kind of playing into it because we're talking about Twitter spats, and that'll just encourage more. Obviously, the issue. So, Tim, you believe, alongside your ex-colleague, the Deputy First Minister, that the extension of presidential voting rights could be a threat to the Good Friday Agreement that both of you campaigned against, ironically.
She's much younger than me. I don't think she was old enough to campaign.
Well, I'm sure I assume joining the DUP, she holds anti-agreement views. Can you elaborate to the listeners about your completely nonsensical argument? And we'll give you 60 seconds.
That's all right. You sound like William Crawley on his talkback debate. You've got 2 minutes to answer, and so you're only giving me 60 seconds.
No, your argument's not worth 2 minutes. Go.
Crawley handled that debate quite well, I thought.
Good. It was very good. It was a good debate. Maybe we need to get somebody in to moderate our debate. But look, I think if this was extending voting rights to Irish citizens wherever they were in the world. Anybody in an Irish passport could vote. Like, that's one thing, and countries can do whatever they like. If they are saying we are going to give the franchise to everybody in the island of Ireland who holds an Irish passport, I think that's different, because on the Belfast Agreement, very clearly on the constitutional part of the Belfast Agreement, where the Irish constitution was changed, it very clearly said, look, anything that's going to affect executive function, anything that's going to affect an extension of the Irish state to the whole of Ireland must be agreed within Strand 2. Strand 2, you'll see, is the creation of the All Ireland bodies. And they're created. I mean, I don't think they've quite worked out the way Irish nationalism had hoped they'd worked out. And conversely,
they've been a disaster.
And conversely, for unionists, I don't think they've worked out as badly. I mean, I've sat on the board of an All Ireland body, and I have to say, I did sit a few times thinking, if this is the nasty incursion of the Republic of Ireland, and this is as bad as it gets, well, my goodness, this is not much to fear at all. I mean, it was so pathetically worthless that it just did make me think, we're wasting so much money on this.
And of course, you're referring to your own single-handed reining in of the ambitions of Intertrade Ireland.
Well, that's right. I was on the Intertrade Ireland board, and I just thought,
Tim, your 60 seconds are up. I love how you spent 45 seconds not actually dealing with the point.
Look, I think that to come back to the point, clearly on the agreement, anything that is an incursion on an All Ireland basis has to be agreed within Strand 2 of the agreement. Now, this could be part of the wider negotiations. This could be part of the wider negotiations of reforming Stormont. Sure, that's the place for this to take place. But whatever you say, David, nonsense or not, this is against the spirit.
It's
at
not.
the very least
No,
of the Belfast
it is
Agreement.
not.
And you nationalists love the spirit of the Belfast Agreement.
Hang on. The franchise for the President of Ireland is a domestic matter for the Irish.
But you're trying to make it a domestic matter in the whole island.
It's got nothing
anyway,
to
take
do.
your 60 seconds.
It has got nothing to do. It has got nothing to do.
You've got your 60 seconds now, David, to tell us why you want to disapply the Belfast Agreement.
No. It's basically the smokescreen that you're doing up. The fact is, the franchise for the presidency has got nothing to do with the Good Friday Agreement. What the Good Friday Agreement dealt with was an amendment, by the way. It didn't, by the way, get rid of the aspiration of Irish unification, by the way. That's what unionists regularly say. It didn't. What it did was it removed the territorial claim. The President of Ireland is the President of the Irish nation, not just of the 26 county state. So that's point one. Point two, no one is compelling unionists to take part in this election. You can ignore it. No one's asking unionism to pay for it. The Northern Ireland state are not paying for the elections. The Irish government will. So there's no financial cost to the Northern Ireland state in doing this. That's point two. And point three, by the way, to deal with the other erroneous claims about the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. It's funny how the unionists I hear talk most about this were the people who campaigned against that agreement and who told us that the agreement was leading us one way into a united Ireland, which, as Tim has alluded to, has not happened. So maybe you'll apologise to the pro-agreement unionists you tore lumps out of in 2003 during those elections. But there's absolutely nothing to do with the Good Friday Agreement, and it just shows how threadbare the opposition is to it. I just wish that if you don't want to be part of it, you don't have to be part of it. But let those of us who do want to actually campaign for it, get it through a referendum, because it has to be approved in a referendum by Southern voters, and then allow us to take part in it. Michael D. Higgins or Catherine Connolly, whoever gets elected on Friday, will have no executive function in Northern Ireland.
But David, you've already said yourself it's the Irish nation. So why not just give it to everybody who's Irish across the globe? I'm not opposing Irish citizens living in Australia being able to vote as well. So if Irish citizens in Australia, America, Canada, Timbuktu were allowed to vote in the election, I think that's one thing. And because a lot of countries do that, some countries choose not to do that, a lot of countries choose to do that. That's fine. That's one thing. But what was being discussed by Matthew O'Toole and Emma Little-Pengelly was the extension of the franchise just to Northern Ireland. That's fine if they want to. Now, engage in the Belfast Agreement. Don't engage the Belfast Agreement. The agreement is very clear. Anything that would be an incursion of executive function must be agreed in Strand 2. This has not been agreed in Strand 2. Agreed in Strand 2 and then have your referendum.
The Irish Constitution is absolutely clear as well, where it recognises citizenship as the island of Ireland, not just the 26 county states.
That is perfectly fine. That's
perfectly, yeah, it is perfectly fine. Thanks, Tim. Thank you. Wasn't seeking your permission for it,
They
mate,
can
but thank
claim
you for
whatever
giving
they
it.
want, but it's very clear on the Belfast Agreement. You disapply it if you want. That's for
I'm
you
not
to make that
disapplying anything.
argument.
It's got nothing to do
But
with
if
the
you
credit
disapply it, then we'll disapply the
You're
whole of the
repeating
agreement.
yourself.
Let's disapply the whole of the agreement. I'd be quite happy to go back to disapply the whole thing and let's start from scratch. Now, that's clearly what your argument is.
You don't need to disapply.
That, Tim, is what we're going to do in the New Ireland, in the discussions around the New Ireland. We will eventually disapply the entire agreement.
We need to disapply nothing. This is a complete smokescreen used
It
by
amazes me, the nationalists who go
out.
cry, Belfast's a Good Friday Agreement, when it backs them up, and then say, oh, no, this can be changed with a stroke of a pen when it's something they don't like. That's your nationalism. That's your nationalism.
Tim, you have completely changed your tune on this.
Yeah.
Your initial thing a few pods ago was that you didn't give a damn who is this president anyway.
Yeah,
some insignificant figure. Who cares who votes for?
That was for.
Now you've found some alleged legal device to prevent it from happening.
That was for a worldwide
I think you're wrong
vote.
on that, incidentally, but it's something that probably should happen. I think the parties in the South have agreed it. They're going to legislate for it. They're going to put it to the people. And if it's carried, it'll happen. If it's not carried, fine.
Imagine getting triggered by Catherine Connolly or Michael D. Higgins, for goodness sake. Gee, wind your neck in, seriously. Irish unity is being planned in the arse.
I'll tell you what, if that's who you want to represent you abroad, that balloon Catherine Connolly, well, you can have your republic.
Look, speaking of the constitutional debate, by the way, we should plug that coming up later this week, we have Sam McBride, who is Northern Editor of the Belfast Telegraph. He's talking to us about his new book, For and Against United Ireland, he's written with Fintan O'Toole. He'll be coming up on Friday, so that'll be dropping into your feeds then. So do keep an eye on that. Irish presidential election voting day. We will be devoting the next number of podcasts to the presidential election. Tim's going to have updated analysis coming in from what way Donegal voted, and we'll look forward to that.
And East Belfast.
I feel illness coming on.
Look, we'll have all that. Look, really appreciate. We should just stress, me and Tim are friends, by the way, and none of this is. Well, it is a wee bit serious on my part. Probably not as much on Tim's.
I do go back to what I said. There is a couple of times where we've traded insults, and people have thought, and then somebody's had to come in and say, when somebody's complained about the insults, come in and say, they do know each other. They do a podcast together. And it's because the realization of those people that we're not actually really insulting each other.
People wonder what we're like when we're out for beers, but we're actually calm. No, we're calmer. Jesus, put a microphone in.
And they haven't even seen the WhatsApps.
That's right. You know, honestly, I often say to David, you see, if there's ever a public inquiry and our WhatsApps are put into it, we are snookered.
Our phones are private. They're not. No public phones have been harmed in the making of our WhatsApp group. Anyway, look, gents, thank you very much for going around the houses with me again. So thank you so much for joining us on the Stormont Sources podcast. Remember, if you want to engage with anything we've said, drop us a WhatsApp with your questions or comments, 0333 404 6507. Remember to use the word Stormont. You can also drop us an email, hello@stormontsources.com. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again next week.